Welcome to the FLORE Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore. This is our Introduction to the Boys series. We are going to start way back in the 1950s and talk about the comic book code very briefly. If you want a more detailed version, you'll definitely want to check out our Introduction to Comic series for that. But we'll mention how we get from the restrictive rules of the comic book code all the way to something as graphic and violent and dark as The Boys. We'll move through the 1980s and the Swamp Thing saga and how that had a big impact in a lot of comics moving into this darker territory. We will talk about some of the changes from the comics to the television show, some of the things they altered and why fans are enjoying the show usually more than the comics. If that is what you're interested in, this is the episode for you. Roll the intro.
Right. Welcome to a new chapter of The FLORE, and today we will be getting into The Boys. We have The Boys coming out, The Boys Season 4 coming out June 13th, so we thought we'd dip our toe into it. The Boys, you'd know them from Amazon Prime, but this is not an original Amazon Prime. This is a comic book that it is based off of. Same title, The Boys. Now,
this will be an introduction episode, so we're going to go back to inspirations and key events that led to its creation. I mean, it's not like D&D. We're not going all the way ancient Persia, but we are going to start a little bit before it all begins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we look at the earliest superhero stories being told, one of the things that very quickly develops is supervillains, because they start out as superheroes fighting crime, but very quickly that just doesn't work out. These are demigods fighting ordinary people with guns. You can't really tell that story very many times before it gets dull. So very quickly we have the evolution of the supervillain, because you need them to deal with superheroes.
Right. Problems that are scaled to their strength. Right.
Yes, problems that are scaled to their strength. And so that then, kind of introduces the question culturally, why aren't there just supervillains? Why do we even have superheroes, right? Because ordinary people overcoming incredible odds is a keystone of storytelling. That's why we have dragon slayers, right? Here's this immense, great challenge, and you go in with just a sword and a shield, maybe a bow, and you've got to find a way to beat this creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And superheroes in their very first storytellings turn that on its head, right? Instead of the dragon being the villain, they were the heroes, saving all of dragonkind from these weak humans.
Yeah.
And so we have that, but nothing is really done about that kind of storytelling, or at least nothing that makes it really big for a long time. And so the first push we get in this direction actually happens in the 1980s. The saga of the Swamp Thing is a story that DC was trying to get published in the 1980s. And they submitted it to the Comic Code Authority 4 times and it was rejected. Now, I'm not going to go all the way into the comic book code and all of that. Like, our introduction to comic books covers its creation, why it was created. But essentially, there was a moral panic over comic books. Parents were, either refusing to buy them for children because of this moral panic, or trying to, shame children for buying and owning them. And this led to comic books creating comic book code, which essentially comes down to a few core elements. No nudity, no drug use, no grotesque violence, right? This is where we start to blam on the page covering the actual violence. So you don't actually see them hit each other. You just know that they did, and it's covered, right? So this is what the comic book code is kind of monitoring, and things definitely get looser as the year goes on, particularly with the violence. But in the 80s, they had submitted Swamp Thing Saga 4 times, made the adjustments, submitted, and after the 4th rejection, they're like, you know what? Maybe we just don't deal with them anymore. And the readers of comic books were getting older, right? These are kids who had picked up comic books in the 40s and 50s. Now, comic books do start in the 30s, but it's not until after World War II that the income of average U.S. citizens really rises, which then gives a disposable income or allowance to children to start buying them. So by the time we get into the 80s, comic book readers are in their 30s and 40s, that big chunk of that audience. And they want older, more mature stories. And the comic book code is preventing them from telling those kinds of stories. And so after this rejection, DC decides we're going to set up another press that doesn't have a contract with the comic code authority. And we're just going to put in all these things that they won't let us. We will have drug use. We'll have gratuitous violence. There will be sex, sometimes nudity, right? All these things that we can't have, we're going to start putting into these stories because that older audience wants that, and they're not getting it. So that leads to the development of Vertigo Comics. And out of Vertigo Comics, we get some of these very successful and praised stories. We get V for Vendetta. We get Watchmen, right? These are far more complex, darker stories than we usually got in comic books. Not only that, but they were able to include, the sex, the drugs, the nudity, the death, right? All of these darker themes that the comic book code had prevented from appearing before. I mean, there was a reason you couldn't kill anybody in a comic book. And then Vertigo Comics starts this, and they're successful, which means other people start doing it. So within the line of Vertigo Comics, there is something called Wildstorm, which is another publication. And it is Wildstorm that picks up The Boys. So they are a press that is not beholden to the comic book code. If you have read or seen The Boys, clearly they do not abide by that code at all. They do not care. Now, Wildstorm is owned by DC. And so this is way back in 2006 when they first start releasing The Boys. And it is canceled after the first 6 issues because this was DC, and there's a very strong anti-hero theme within The Boys, right?
So specifically their core team, their bread and butter, their classic heroes, right?
Yeah. DC Comics is all about superheroes, right? You've got Batman, you've got Superman. 2 of the big 3 are from DC. And then you have The Boys, painting these stories where the superheroes are awful, right? Their version of Superman is the worst guy ever, right? Just an absolute social.
The last guy you want to be Superman is Superman.
Yeah. So after 6, they discontinue again, not because it wasn't successful, but because they're like, it just feels like it is too much against what we do.
Right. DC was like, we don't like that one. There's too much anti-hero rhetoric. Let's cancel it. Yeah.
So The Boys is created by Ennis and Robertson. They are the original creators on this. And DC allowed them to have the rights revert back. They were grateful for that. And they are then able to take this over to Dynamite Entertainment and finish the 72-issue series with a few spinoffs. And Dynamite Entertainment, there's some titles here you'll recognize with, again, these darker themes. We've got Army of Darkness. We've got RoboCop, Red Sonja, The Boys. You can't, these themes of, darker, more complex, more gratuitous violence kind of stories you see coming out of that publication.
And from being canceled to having their first release at Dynamite, it was only 4 months, right? Like, they got picked up really fast, dude.
Yeah. It was, I think it was a story people were thirsty for, right? One of my big complaints about Superman has always been every story's got kryptonite, because otherwise what are you doing? Right? It is just a ticking clock on when the kryptonite is going to show up. Whereas when Superman is the villain and there is no kryptonite, it's a whole different story. And I think that's one of the most intriguing elements of The Boys is, one, you have ordinary people having to go up against demigods. And, some of the most interesting scenes are watching the boys sit around and be like, okay, how do we deal with this?
Here's the problem. Let's solve it.
Yeah, here's the problem. Let's try to find a way to solve it with our brains, and, I think it makes for much better storytelling than a lot of these superhero stories. Now, I love Batman. I think Batman's a great story. But again, Batman is also a story of a non-demigod, right?
Yes.
He's a superhero because he thinks and has the wealth to then manifest his ideas.
And the grit, right? That's his real superpowers, the grit.
Well, it's I mean, Batman is definitely a genius, right? There is no doubt in he is a physics and engineering genius in the way he, solves these problems. Not only that, but I mean, particularly if you go into the animated world, into the comics, he's a tactical genius as well, right? Batman is profoundly intelligent in a way that we rarely see in the cinematic manifestations of him, right? There's so much focus on just him physically fighting the crime. Right. You don't see the brilliant mind at work, but in the comics and even in some of the animated movies, you really see that come out. Like Batman is 10 steps ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. Whereas in The Boys, we have the Black Noir, who's kind of just a psychopath.
Yeah, so there are definitely, The Boys definitely have some parodies of some of the big names. Homelander, clearly Superman, Black Noir. People, and a lot of people attribute to Batman, but he might be built on some others, right? You have Queen Maeve, definitely Wonder Woman.
Yep. The Deep Aquaman.
A-Train, The Flash.
So one interesting thing here, well, if you're passing the baton yet, I don't know if you are.
I think I've mostly covered what I was going to cover. Oh, so the first Boys comic comes out in 2006, and they finish up their series in 2012. And The Reckoners is a series by Brandon Sanderson, which is the same story, but not all the drugs and sex and just depravity that we see in The Boys. But again, is a story about ordinary people going up against, super-powered kind of demigods. And so I do wonder if he was inspired by The Boys. I've never seen him reference that. But that timeline really matches up. And, Sanderson's books, I don't actually know if anything of his has made it to film or TV. A lot of it has been bought over and over, in attempts to create those because, his books, he dominates, the top of fantasy and sci-fi list with his books. He, knocks it out of the park. It's surprising to me that nobody has turned them into TV and movies yet. He hasn't mentioned it, and he may have just looked at the Superman problem the way I did and be like, he should have been the villain. Otherwise, everything is just too easy for him, right? The famous part where Superman is talking about everybody's out there, fighting as hard as they can, and I have to pretend, and I'm fighting like everything's made of cardboard, and I don't want to tear my enemies to pieces on accident, And while that does introduce kind of some interesting dynamics to how Superman approaches everything, nonetheless, you have this really unstoppable God. And he's a good guy, right? Whereas, Kryptonite is always going to show up, and it becomes a little bit predictable in that way. Whereas when he's the villain, just a whole nother ball game, and for some reason that just really appeals to me.
Yeah, when you're reading Superman comics, they say Kryptonite's really rare, but it doesn't seem like it is.
Yeah, they say Kryptonite is very rare, but it doesn't seem like it at all.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So it's Gareth Ennis who wrote this. He also wrote Preacher, which also became a big hit show.
Yes.
So this is his second one that's turned live action, become a big hit. While he was still writing The Boys in 2009, they were looking to make it into a movie. It was Columbia Pictures. And it was going to have Russell Crowe as Billy Butcher. And it was also going to have Simon Pegg as Huey, who he is.
I think the interesting thing is that Huey was based on Simon Pegg.
That's right.
When they created the artwork for the comics, that's the guy. So, really interesting to see. They're like, hey, why don't we just have him play Huey?
Right. Well, he ends up playing Huey's dad.
Right. Yes.
In the live action. And then when Diabolical comes out, he is Huey's voice. Simon.
I didn't even notice that.
So, just his countenance and everything, they're like, that's Huey energy right there,
I don't know. I feel like, what's his name? Quaid. I can't remember his first name. I know it's Dennis Quaid's son.
And the one that I feel like... Huey.
Yeah, the one who plays Huey. I feel he's done a great job. He really comes off as just innocent and naive, and then, just is plunged into these dark and terrible worlds. And you see it changing him, you know. He was getting rougher around the edges.
He always changes a lot. He's got a great development arc. Not one I want to live, but
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. So, yeah, and then in 2019, we have
So what happened? Why does the movie fall through?
one, like, it was going to have to be R-rated. Another one was the budget that was being asked for it was really high, and it just kind of fell apart, and that never came together. You know, it was kind of didn't ever get a full launch on that, or even too much of a launch. It doesn't seem. I didn't do too much back history there.
Yeah, well, these fall through all the time for all kinds of weird reasons.
I also feel like if we had gotten that movie, we would have gotten a live action that is The Boys Light. You know, we wouldn't have gotten as deep into it, and they have developed more and more of it. So like Kimiko from the story, she's the superhuman with the boys, the super strong,
the females
is what she's referred to in the comics.
Yeah, in the comics, she's just the female. Yeah,
and so she gets fleshed out a lot more. The Deep gets fleshed out a lot more. Changed quite a bit, but you know, he's still there. Well, interesting one I thought was an interesting like early change is Translucent is a replacement character.
Yes, that was always surprising to me. Be like, why?
Well, I think they did a good job with it, and I think they didn't want to go headlong into some racist jerk, you know. Right off the bat, they wanted to keep it a little pulled back at first. Well, they pull punches from the comic book. That bad stuff still happens. It's just a little bit worse than the comic book. You know, like that's how it often is.
Funny, as dark as The Boys is, he likes like the comic is dark.
The comic book gets darker.
It's just hard to imagine because, like, by the time you get to season 3 of The Boys, starts going down.
But no, I even like. So I was watching the first episode with a girl, and the scene where A-Train runs through his girlfriend, and she's like, "Oh," like having a hard time. So I pause it and I say, "If this is too much, let's just stop now." Like, there's no reason to go forward. Like,
this is not the shocking opening. This is to prepare you for what's to come. You know, like this is not like a big shocker. You got your attention. Now we're gonna take you on a journey. Be like, no. This is to prepare you for the journey. Say, handle this. You are not ready.
This is your first boss in an Elden Ring like game. You know, if that's too much. If you don't like that, then it doesn't for you.
Yeah, I had a friend watch it too, and I like there were a few times like, oh, how like, oh, that's messed him up. I'm like, if you're not ready for this, you're not ready for The Boys. Like, it's like you understand this is the surface. It's just gonna go downhill from here. You know, you're not ready for The Boys.
And when they put out a trailer for The Boys, when season 1 was coming out. Like, that was the trailer, was just that scene of she explodes, and he's panicking, and he runs off, right? And that's all they were giving us, right? Like, The Boys, you know. So, but speaking of, like, season 3, they ran out of blood, like, 2 months in, and had to order a bunch of new blood. But, heavy on the gore.
Yeah. So I guess they say that it's a big change from the comics to the TV show is that they're a official CIA sanctioned group, The Boys. But within the show, they kind of go back and forth. Like, the backstory is they used to be CIA, that at some point they work, maybe not for the CIA, but like a different government branch. And then they get, that gets shut down, and then they're a rogue group again. So within the show, they kind of like bounce around.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the main things I see of people comparing the comic book to the live action is they like the live action more, which is usually not the case, right?
Usually not the case, yeah.
And somebody does an adaptation like that,
Although, I mean,
everything's better.
Homelander is so well done. And Billy Butcher, I feel like Homelander, Billy Butcher, and Huey have just knocked it out of the park with this thing. Like, Huey, he starts off doing that innocent, naive so well, and just his evolution through the dark journey of the boys. You see it change him. And Homelander, you just hate him so much. Yes. And yet at the same time, you face the same problem Billy Butcher does. How do you stop him? Stop him. Yeah, right. He's the worst. But what is he going to do? Right? Like, I mean, even the people at Vought are terrified of him because they're like, yeah, he's out of control, but he'll just kill you. Right? He'll just kill you.
You going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Because nobody knows that answer.
Yeah,
Billy Butcher walks around with this question in his head.
All day, every day. How do I kill Homelander? Yeah. Yeah, that's his whole world.
That's his whole world.
Yeah. So, and I know that the backstory of his wife is very different in the story as well. Like, he is laying in bed next to her when the baby tears itself out of her stomach, killing her, and then he kills the child, right? Because it's running around shooting lasers and destroying everything.
With his lamp. It was a brutal moment. Yes.
But I think the introduction of Ryan to the story definitely complicates Billy Butcher's life. This connection to his wife, to Homelander. Like, there is now this messy, entangled world that complicates how Butcher has to navigate kill Homelander. Right? So I think it was a good choice, varied from the comics, but I do think it was a good choice.
Yeah. And we'll see where that goes, but that is them taking a deviant path here. Real quick, with the success of the comic, there was spin-offs.
Yes.
Herogasm, there's Highland Laddie, and then there's Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker. And then also he made a sequel called Dear Becky, Becky being Butcher's wife. Kind of going through a Butcher's journal kind of deal.
Right.
And get a glimpse into his past life before he started wondering, how do I kill superheroes? I wanted to talk about Translucent, how he's a replacement character. The character he replaces is called Jack from Jupiter. This guy's a parody of Martian the Manhunter. Yeah. There's even an Easter egg in Season 2, Episode 7, where you catch a glimpse of him. So they might end up bringing him into the series. Yeah. He flies, kind of looks like an alien a little bit. And he's one of his superpowers, kind of like a Shazam kind of thing. He says Carpo, and then he gets all buff and tough. So that's a few things, but like I said, by him, he's overtly racist, like expensive rare drugs. These are some.
Well, I think we got
qualities.
The Hawk guy. Can't even remember his full name, but he's very racist, right? And Adrian ends up killing him. He just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
So we definitely did get some very racist heroes thrown in there.
All right. Well, Stormfront, she shows up.
Yes. Yeah, Stormfront. I mean, she was a Nazi. Yeah. No, she's dead. I think she dies in 2. She dies at the end of 2 or beginning of 3, somewhere in there.
But I mean, until the end, she was.
Until the end, she was a Nazi. Yeah.
But the boys, so kind of another difference of the comic to the TV shows. A lot of people say the comic, feels a little bit more like angsty teenager writing, leading into the gore. Now, in TV show, they still are into the gore, but one of the things they do more heavily is the whole corporate thought, that overtone, selling the narratives and all that stuff.
And I think you can really that definitely strengthens its storytelling. Is thought be like. Yeah, corporations do that, and it seems like some of just like the terrible things that the superheroes do and get away with is almost based on old Hollywood, right? people were making so much money off of these big stars that they would do anything to make sure they didn't go to jail, regardless of what they did, because they're like, no, I got to keep making my money, and they need that face to do it. And so they're like, they would cover up, all kinds of atrocities and terrible things because, there was thousands of people making millions off of those stars.
That's right. So, yeah, the boys, we're getting excited for a new season here and all the exciting things we've seen in the trailer, such as V'd up chickens. They're unloading.
I didn't watch the trailer because I didn't want any spoilers. I actually haven't seen the trailer, so me and my friend Austin, we're kind of like, we don't want to. If there's something we really want to see, we don't want to see the trailer. For something you know nothing about, check out the trailer to get interested. But it's like, I already know. I'm looking forward to this, so I'm just going to go in cold. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will try not to spoil that for you, although I already did a piece. But yeah, coming out on June 13th, and we'll be releasing weekly episodes.
Yeah, so 3 drop on the 13th, and then it's 1 a week after that.
Yeah,
I might have to wait until like July to watch it because then I could just knock it out. So I hate the waiting. Not only that, but I feel like it dampens the experience. To have that disconnect from one episode to another. Okay, so let's roll things back to let's say the 1940s. It's about the 5th time Kryptonite shows up in a Superman comic, and I'm like, you know what? We did it backwards. We superheroes are always the villains. Who do you make your big superhero villains? You can't, of course, take the ones the boys took. They took the Flash, they took the Superman, they took the Wonder Woman. Right? Who are you going to take to make your awesome villains if you can't have those ones?
Okay.
Talk about it in the treasure room.
See you there.
Welcome to the FLORE Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore, wherever you get your podcasts.